Hello and welcome back. Max here from Summerland Recording, continuing on with our series on recording acoustic jazz. Today we're going to be talking about the different techniques and microphones that I use when I record acoustic piano here in the studio. If you haven't seen the first three parts of this series, I'll post the links down below. Thank you so much for joining me, and I hope you enjoy the video. Alright, so recording acoustic piano can often be challenging for a few different reasons. The first being that every piano has its own unique sound. I've played pianos that were made at the same time from the same factory, possibly even from the same batch of wood, and each still had its own characteristics and a different sound. What this means is that there really isn't any one technique that is great for recording all types of piano. It depends on the genre of music, it depends on the space that you're in, and it also depends on the type of piano you're recording. You may find that how you record a Steinway may not be the best option for recording something like a Baldwin or a Yamaha piano. Another challenge when recording acoustic piano, specifically in a jazz setting, is the volume and size of the instrument. Here in the studio we have a 6-foot grand piano that can't be moved around or put in a different room, which means that the other musicians aren't going to be really isolated from the piano, and the piano isn't going to be isolated from the other musicians. So when setting up for a recording session, I try to keep this in mind and place the nulls of each microphone towards the loudest sources like the piano and the drums. For this video, I'll only be showcasing techniques that would be feasible to use when recording a live jazz band in one room. If I was going to record piano on its own, I'd probably get a little bit more creative with mic technique and microphone choice. I'd probably add lots of room mics as well as close mics, but seeing that we're in a jazz setting and there's going to be multiple musicians in the room, we have to be cognizant of the bleed. So for the first technique, we're going to try what I call the Rudy Van Gelder technique. Rudy Van Gelder recorded many of the great jazz records and was known for his unique piano sound. I first saw this technique being used in a session photo of Herb Nichols sitting at the piano in Rudy Van Gelder's first studio, which was actually in his parents' living room. Rudy was using a U47 that was tilted down towards the piano strings, placed directly next to the stick that holds up the piano lid, and then a ribbon microphone, in Rudy's case an RCA 44BX microphone, was placed inside the lid, pointing straight down towards the soundboard. Well, you'd very rarely see this technique used today, mainly because it's in mono. I thought it was important to try out because it's on so many of our favorite jazz recordings, and it can give a nice vintage kind of sound. I'll be using a Peluso 2247 LE microphone, which is a clone of a U47, and I'll be using a Coles 4038 in place of the RCA 44BX ribbon microphone. All of the mics that you're going to hear in this video today are going to be going into an API 312 preamp with no added EQ or compression. Let's see how this first technique sounds. As you can hear, it's a really boxy sound and it's in mono, but if you're looking for a vintage sound, this technique could work really well. For the next technique, we're going to try a very simple stereo setup. I'm going to place two microphones in a spaced pair configuration, just inside the lid and with the microphones tilting down towards the strings. This technique should give us a nice mix of both the percussive sound of the hammers hitting the strings of the piano, as well as the sound coming from the soundboard and bouncing off the lid, which is how you would hear the piano in the room. What I like about this technique is that with only two microphones, we greatly reduce the chance of having a lot of bleed, and we also have the option of placing the microphone slightly outside the lid, closing it to half stick, and throwing a moving blanket over top just to further isolate it from the rest of the band. So for this technique, I'll be using a stereo pair of Neumann TLM 102s. They're really versatile mics and I highly recommend them. Let's have a listen. Okay, for the next technique, I'm going to use the same stereo pair configuration, but I'm going to use two Gefell UMT-70S microphones, which I really like. I'm also going to add a mic to the bass strings, which will be a Neumann M149, just to see if we can add a little bit more low-end definition to the recording. First we'll listen to the stereo pair, then we'll add the M149 and see how it sounds. All right, for the next technique, we're going to leave the Neumann M149 where it is, but we're actually going to change the position of the stereo pair. I'm going to place the Gefell microphones with their capsules pointing straight down towards the hammers, one on the treble side and one on the bass side. This should give us a bit more attack to the recording as the microphones are nice and close to the hammers hitting the strings. Let's have a listen to the stereo pair first, and then we'll add the 149. Okay, let's listen to each of these recordings again back to back just for a good honest comparison. Alrighty, thank you so much for joining me for another video on recording acoustic jazz. We've now looked at all the main rhythm section instruments that are found in a jazz ensemble. So for the next few videos, we'll be talking about brass, so trumpet and trombone, as well as different woodwind instruments like clarinet and saxophone. This series will culminate with a tracking session with a live jazz ensemble where we can see what all of these techniques that we've talked about sound like together during a real session. Thank you so much for joining me again. I'm Max from Summerland Recording. Hope you enjoyed the video.